if I do nothing else with my life, I will make it solo to the pole. And those were the last words that he heard.
Welcome to The Art of Adventure, brought to you by Arthur Bill, outfitters to explorers, adventurers and vagabonds for over 500 years. My guest today made a promise to his dying father and then spent 15 years trying to keep it. He dreamt of walking alone from Canada to the North Pole. No resupplies, no teammates, just one man. 125 kilogram sledge in some of the most inhospitable terrain on Earth. And he promised his father that he would succeed. His name is Hadow. It took 3 attempts over 15 years. When he finally got there, the experience changed not just his life, but what he understood about our planet. Welcome to The Art of Adventure, and thank you very much for joining us today. We're really excited to have you here. One of the things we talk about in this podcast is whether people are born adventurers or it's something they actually become and develop over time. Out of all the guests we have on the podcast, you are the one who seems to have been born the adventurer the most, if that makes sense. Perhaps you could tell us what your background was that shaped the amazing things that you were to do later.
Good to be here. I would say from my sort of personal thinking, by way of context on all this, is that one is not born to adventure in a sort of genetic way. If you've got the nature versus nurture debate, I think it's very much, certainly for me, has come from nurture, albeit from a very early age. I was born in Perth in Scotland, and we lived in the Ochil Mountains, which were near, well north of the border, shall we say, and quite cold in the winters. And my father took on a lady called Enid Wigley to help my mother look after me. Enid's previous work, in fact, her first job when she was about 17 years old, was to look after Captain Scott's son, Peter Scott, when he was 3 years old. His father had just died. A letter was brought back from Captain Scott from his tent where he was found. The letter said, get the boy interested in the natural world, keep him in the fresh air, get him acclimatized to life in the outdoors. Well, her next job, or one of her later jobs, was then to look after my father when he was a small boy. And he took on a lot of these stories and about what I know as the Antarctic boys, as I refer to them, who are like virtual uncles to me. The Scotts, Shackletons, Mawsons, de Gerlache, and all sorts of others. And so when she came to live with us in Scotland, and I was from the age of 1, in fact, younger than 1, I was put out in the cold for longer and longer periods in the autumns, winters and springs with less and less clothing, and was toughened, in inverted commas, through this sort of quasi-Spartan regime to be able to deal with difficult temperatures.
Right. So obviously you've had this training and then you went off to prep school and you went on to have quite a lot of sort of sporting success at that school.
A year before, I started my last year there, so age 12 and a half, whatever, a new master came in who was super talented, and he was all about athletics, which was a real shock to the school because they weren't into athletics. We did that on sports day and that was it. He said, no, this is a full-time activity. And he really taught me how to train, and that if you are compliant, if you stick to your training program, the more rigorously you do so, the more your results follow. And I found myself pulling away from my colleagues, peer group, because they weren't training, not as thoroughly as I was. I was doing it in the holidays every day or 6 days a week to a very specific program. But I wasn't really sporty. I just trained very hard.
And from that from him, in effect, you got the inspiration and the discipline and the structure to continue that training onto Harrow.
Yeah, I'd really learnt through experience, which is, an important way of really taking something on board, that if you train hard and you've got a particular goal, it so much is about the training. Which then makes one think, well, actually, so really it's about how fit and strong you can be. But I would say, no, it's not that, actually. It's the hardest bit is doing the training mentally, getting up in the mornings, finding the extra time in the day, pushing yourself hard during the training. That's all mental. So without the sort of psychological wherewithal, you ain't going to be compliant to the training program. running around a track is like the easy bit, I would say.
So you left Harrow, and then perhaps the biggest, I mean, there was a lot of surprise in your life, but one of the biggest surprises for me is obviously you applied to join the army and didn't get into the army. I would have thought you were the most perfect candidate for the army possible.
Well, yeah, that's kind of what I thought, to be honest. The reason you're not taught. So there are 4 things they can tell you. You do this regular commissions board, as it was known then. It's about 3.5 days of IQ tests, writing essays, jumping through hoops at high speeds, all sorts of things, leader tasks. And the problem was that I just couldn't get into it. The others were all super enthusiastic, but you're literally on a rugby pitch and there's some ropes put down, and that's that marks the edge of the river. The blue things are the crocodiles, the red drums are this, the yellow drums. Inevitably, it was so artificial. And I didn't really get involved. I was called in twice by the boss man. He said, we cannot give you points if you don't actually, really get stuck and start contributing, saying things. I said, yes, very good. And I couldn't. And I think I'm grateful that they realised that I was a square peg heading for a round hole, and that I just wasn't right in some way. And I'm probably grateful that they did say it's not for you.
So despite this sort of very sort of traditional British education, actually there was a sort of rebelliousness or anti-establishment. There was something in there which wouldn't quite fit into this expectation.
And maybe it was me at a subconscious level saying, this is not for me. I don't want to take that leap into this space that's going to be highly structured. It's going to break me down and rebuild me in the manner in which they need me to be an effective officer. To the extent that I understood those things, there was something just that held me back, and they noticed that, and they just said, until I've got yourself into a mindset where you want to pitch in all in, you're not for us.
So you went off to university, and from what I've read, you were slightly sort of frustrated at university because you weren't sort of quite sure what you were going to do in life, and you wanted to be doing something exciting, and you couldn't see a way to do it.
Yeah, I'm slightly wondering if you've been reading my psychiatric reports or so. She's extremely well informed, slightly alarming. I don't know what's coming next. I did struggle. I think that a public school environment, and Harrow perhaps particularly, you're in a highly structured environment. Every minute is accounted for, and then to suddenly be released into a do what you like when you like environment. I struggled with that. At age 58, my personal psychiatrist said, you do know you've got ADHD quite severely. I have no idea. So that explained quite a lot.
Did I read somewhere that you actually picked up a copy of the Yellow Pages and almost read it for inspiration?
That's I know that's ADHD. I thought, well, okay, I did not want to join the milk round, I think, or milk run, whatever it's called, where all the big companies come to the universities and try and pick off the best people. I didn't even go to that. I thought, I don't want to work with a bank or what have you. So what am I going to do? And I'd read geography, and I literally had no idea. So I thought, well, I better... Right, I'll get the Yellow Pages, and at the front of the Yellow Pages, it has a listing of all the different headings. So I went through the whole list. It was about 8 pages of very small text. And I think I've still got them, these pages I tore out and was highlighting or ticking or underscoring the ones that I thought might be of interest. Didn't help.
Because it's interesting that, again, with your traditional background, if it's not the army, then you would think, well, maybe banking or lawyer or accountant. But again, that, you rejected the milk round and then you ended up doing what actually sounded like a really cool and interesting job. Perhaps you want to talk about that.
Well, I was a landscape gardener, and I did it for about 18 months, holding out for I'm not going to commit to something that I don't really want to do. So I was in a holding pattern, and I read an article one summer, it would have been just before Wimbledon, and there was always an article about a chap called Mark McCormack, who was the guy who basically invented sports sponsorship and sports marketing. He also looked after some of the top sports people. And I thought, that sounds quite being a business agent for sports stars. That's the sort of life I think I could probably meshing quite nicely with. And so, I went for an interview and got the job. So I became quite quickly I was the youngest executive they'd ever taken on. And I was the head of their European equestrian department, looking after riders and equestrian events.
So you had this to what many would have been an absolute dream job.
Yeah.
But there was still a little sense of frustration. It was you were doing the managing, not the sporting. But I don't.
That's exactly it. And I was actually getting very, I wouldn't even say frustrated, particularly, I was very depressed. I wasn't basically playing to my skills and my interests. There was some overlap, but not nearly enough. And I went and read a book one lunchtime in the Royal Geographical Society, which was quite nearby in their library. And it's quite a story to it, but I basically randomly read a book about an Arctic expedition undertaken by a German explorer that no one has ever heard of. I was the first person to even open that book, because the librarian had to get a razor blade and cut open the tops of every page or every other page, because they were continuous bits of paper. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to honour this incredible effort that this chap had made up in the Arctic on Baffin Island, mapping the fauna and flora. Anyway, I walked back across the park, Hyde Park, and I thought, I'm going to resign. And I did. I resigned that afternoon, having read the book an hour earlier. And I thought, why am I doing this? Why does this feel so right and so strong? I thought, well, the books I've got tiny, schoolboy bookshelves of about 3 rows of books at home in my bedroom. And they were nearly all about adventure. And one of the great ones for me was Quest for Adventure, edited by Chris Bonington, about all the great adventures from all the different spheres: desert, ocean, space, underwater. That was one of them. But all my books, Wilbur Smith, all the famous explorers, I kind of had a book of theirs. But it never clicked that could be a future for me. But in that moment, it became the start of my sort of Arctic life.
So you resigned from IMG.
Yeah.
Tell us about your first venture into the Arctic.
So I had a clear plan. I was going to replicate Bernard Adolf Hansch's expedition. And he'd done this phenomenal effort single-handedly with the support of Inuit to help him move all his goods and chattels across Baffin Island from east to west and then up the west coast, mapping the fauna and flora. So he'd done what we would call a baseline survey, which is interesting in its own right, but it becomes super valuable when you start going back and doing exactly the same measurements X number of years later, because then you can see the changes and the rates of change if you start doing more and more of these things. So I wanted to honour him by doing a repeated survey. I put an investment in a magazine called The Adventurer. Wanted experienced radio operator for Arctic expeditions. And I got a response back from a fellow called Vaughan Purvis, who's sadly since died. And he said, Penn, I'm not coming. I'm a very experienced radio operator.
And you're not.
And I'm not coming with. Have you ever been to the Arctic, Ben? And you're going to leave me there? I don't think so. I've been to the Arctic several times. I will mentor you. You come on my expedition, his expedition, which is across the island of Svalbard, on the edge of the Arctic Ocean, across the sea ice, island to island, photographing and filming polar bears. You come with me for 70 days on that, just you and me. I will give you a one-on-one, super intense grounding in how to operate in inhospitable, ultra remote, no possibility of rescue or pickup, and that's what he did.
So that was a stroke of luck, because
kind of was, because he's one of the world's best.
Yeah, but why would he pick you with no experience? I mean, that's what's incredible, that you would think in that situation it's quite helpful to have someone who knows what they're doing.
I think I've never been put like that. Why on earth did he pick me? Now, hang on, I always thought I'd picked him, but obviously not.
I should rephrase that.
No, you shouldn't. That's exactly right. And I think the answer to your question, he can't be here to defend himself, is that he wanted someone. There's an order of magnitude, if not magnitudes, less risk if you go with somebody else. And you don't bump into people who want to get into the Arctic experience, as deep as I did, very often. So I think he saw an opportunity to, improve the sort of scope of his own expedition. Fine by me.
And that's transformational, because from that expedition, you developed all the skills, or the base for the skills that would serve you so well in the future.
Yeah, exactly that. And there are some probably about 5 really important lessons that I learnt that are fundamental to doing the sort of things that I was going to do. And the most important one, I would say, is when you know what your plan is, right? What is it we're trying to do? Only do that. Do not get distracted by anything else. I used to see iceberg. I saw my first iceberg locked into the sea ice, and it looked thoroughly climbable. And I've been pulling this sledge for weeks, slog, slog, slog at 1 mile an hour. And I thought, God, I'm going to be great fun. Young lad, I wanted to get out of that thing and not conquer it, but just do something different, give a bit of expression to my, vigor. And he said, "Oh, really? So that's what you want to do, is it? Why would you want to do that?" I said, "Well, it's just something to do. Don't mean to be offensive or anything. We're doing a great job here, but." And he said, "So have you got all the kit?" I said, "Well, I don't think we're going to need much kit." So you got crampons, got ropes, ice axe. Well, no. Do you know? Have you ever climbed anything? Have you ever climbed ice like this? No. So what happens if you did fall? You probably, if you did and you broke a leg, what do you think is going to happen next? And I started to think, and it's like, actually, what would actually happen is I would die. He wouldn't be able to get any help. We had no contact with the outside world for 6 weeks. We only had radios in those days. There were no satellite phones, and the ionospheric conditions, the sort of solar sunspots, were so active, and they didn't really forecast solar activity, flare activity in those days. You could not transmit radio frequencies, bounce it off the ionosphere back to wherever you were trying to speak to. So we had no contact. And I learned then, right, when you're doing super dangerous things in hazardous environments with no support, yeah, that makes sense. Do exactly and stick to it. Don't be tempted.
So you came back from that expedition, still enthused, and you sort of set up some sort of polar travel companies in terms of paying members of the public up towards the Arctic.
They had no idea. They're very self-regulating, I have to say, self-selecting. 95, almost literally, because I took about 100 clients over the years, and 95 of them, they were remarkably sensible and good at forecasting what they could really cope with realistically. And then there are about 5 who really, there was a complete lack of connection between their abilities and what was actually happening to them when we take them on these preparation courses on Dartmoor. And they'd be all over the place, but still insisting, no, this is what I want to do. This is what I'm going to do. With or without you, Pen. Right. So I found that quite interesting in itself. I set up this guide company. It was the first to offer to take people and guide them, basically, organise everything and guide them to the North Pole normally from what we call a last degree, so from 89 degrees up to the pole at 90 degrees north, and the plane would drop us off and then collect us at the pole.
But you would always walk the last bit, though, wouldn't you?
We'd always walk the last bit.
Yes,
yeah,
exactly. Yeah,
and over the years it evolved. So you end up starting at the coast and doing like a 500, 600 mile trek to the pole. But most people don't have that time. They don't have that commitment. They can't raise enough money. So most people, they were doing what we call the last degree, which is about 60 nautical miles, 69 statute miles, that sort of thing. Take about 7 days or so to cover that distance. But I set that up because on the flight back from this first 70 days with Vaughan Purvis in Svalbard, I'd been in touch with Rand Fiennes and Mike Stroud, who had been making one of their duo attempts for an unsupported from Canada to the pole. And I just got thinking, well, I've done 70 days on sea ice and I've sort of got the general gist of this. I'm going to see if I can be the first person to go solo from Canada to the pole.
Which is actually, in theory, it's less than 70 days, isn't it? Or thereabouts.
It's
a similar amount of
yes,
time.
It's broadly comparable on sea ice. What's the difference? What's to say no to? I wanted to push back the boundary of what was currently known to be possible. And so that's what I decided to do. And I realized very early on, how do these famous explorers that I sort of admire, I mean, there were several that I particularly admire, like there was Fridtjof Nansen and Sir Francis Chichester. They were sort of 2 very inspirational characters for me. And how do they stay in the game? How did they fund themselves between expeditions? And I thought a guide service would serve me well because it would give me lots of experience in the very environment I needed to do this very difficult thing. So I built up the 10,000 hours on the sea ice over the years, up to 3 months a year, guiding people and just learning more and more about what, on the face of it, looks like, well, you just hitch up the sledge, go north until you get there. It's just how big and strong you are. It's so not what it's about, it turns out. And those 10,000 hours were key to me being able to actually crack the code that would enable me to get there.
So it was during the time when you had the travel company, for want of a better word, that you had this aspiration to do the unsupported trip from Canada to North Pole, but also your father unfortunately died at some stage, and you had a conversation with him on his deathbed, I think, where you made a promise and commitment.
Well, that's right. So I came back in 1989 on the plane. That's when I decided I was going to be the first person to go solo by the harder of the two classic routes to the North Pole, basically from Canada. In 1993, my father died. He did actually die in my arms. I happened to be talking to him, and he had brain cancer, which wasn't operable, and he was extremely unwell at this point, but he sort of, I believed he could understood what I was saying, and it just welled up in me. I just said, totally unplanned, don't worry, if I do nothing else with my life, I will make it solo to the pole. And those were the last words that he heard. And it's a little bit like, that was like a subconscious way of what Turner did. Do you remember when he wanted to experience a storm at sea? So he got the crew and the ship's captain to lash him, to rope him to the mast, so that he wasn't going to go below decks. He was going to be forced to see it as it was and really experience it, so that it would inform his painting. And the same way I've found over the years that once I've got an idea, and I really have thought, probably for years sometimes, really understood the detail of it, and I want to do it, I then start to commit myself to it, and that's by telling my family first, and then my friends, and then maybe the newspapers or whatever. And it's starting to. You've got to do it now.
You can't get out of it.
Yeah. And
tell us about the first attempt, and obviously the problems, particularly with the sledge as well, I think.
Well, I can be brief. I covered about 35 miles in about, memory is hazy now, let's say in 10 days. And then I hit a very large area of open water running across me for probably tens of miles in either direction.
Which you hadn't expected at all?
Hadn't really occurred to me this might, because the books I'd read, that never really seemed to be a feature.
Yeah.
I literally didn't know what to do. I mean, you can't walk, I can't swim it, it's minus 40 degrees. So I sat there waiting for it to either freeze over or close up, which either could happen. And I was there for the balance of the days. So if I did it in 10, it was 25 days. Seriously embarrassing. Thinking, well, I can't go anywhere. What do I do? So that was the end of that, really. I did actually try and do it when it froze over a bit, and I because I thought I must. This is embarrassing. Everyone's watching, in inverted commas. So I just do something, and it was sort of mad, and I did.
You fell in. In your book, you talk about falling in like people step in a puddle. I mean, it's with the within the book, as you try to get out of the water, the ice is breaking, so you can't get. And obviously, you didn't have an immersion suit there, so you were in seriously cold water.
Yeah,
hypothermia was a real risk, and you couldn't get out of the water. But you treat it with a degree of sort of skepticism.
Well,
almost.
it's just like it comes with the territory. What did I expect? I can't whinge about it. It's just what I should have known more about it. Maybe I was being seemingly blasé because but. This is the life I've chosen. This is the project I've chosen. So you can hardly say you appear too shocked and outraged and terrified. I mean, it's panic-inducing, though, as you go down into the water every time, because even if you expect it and think, well, it's quite possible I'm going to go in here, it is deeply shocking when you go in, because you do suddenly, as a flip, you say, this could be the last thing I ever do. This could be it. I've probably got another couple of minutes max, and I'm going to just seize up. And that does happen. That has happened to several explorers that I know in recent times. So it's very real risk. There is training, and as I got more experienced, there was some training activities that I did. There was the introduction of an immersion suit was key. That hadn't really been done before, for swimming the sections of open water, and some sort of procedures that you need to go through just before you go in. Have you got everything set up? You've maximized your escape options, and you have to do that every single time. And then what happens if it actually goes wrong? What do you do? How are you going to feel? And one thing that happens, the panic takes away your peripheral vision. So it's suddenly like that. That's what your eyes can only see straight in front of you. And so you lock on to the first thing that you see, a piece of ice or a thicker bit of ice or a bit of the edge of the bigger ice floe that you've come off that might be the way out. And you just go, well, that's it. But it may not be it. That may not be the best option. In fact, it almost certainly isn't. You just happen to be looking at it in your state of panic. So what you have to train yourself is, right, I know that's what's happening. Right, literally hang in the water. You want to be thrashing around. Don't thrash. Just hang. You're not going to go down to the bottom straight away. You've got lots of air in your suit. And look around. Where is actually, and preferably right around, because it might be behind you that's the best route out. Do that. You can read a book and that's what it tells you to do. You've got to do it. You've got to experience it, and you've got to be running these routines through your mind as you go across very thin ice, because it's probably what's going to save you.
Yeah. So that immersion in the water sort of was the catalyst for the failure of the expedition, really.
Yeah,
wasn't
it was a bit of a shock.
Yeah.
And my sledge was far too heavy. I had far too many spares. What I realised over time is that you've got to get way more competent, and with competence comes confidence, and the two are sort of absolutely interlinked. The thing about competence and confidence is that you can then start to use lighter and lighter equipment. You know how to repair what you've got with what you've got, and you've got sort of right. Well, if the stove stops working, what else? How else are you going to keep the project alive or yourself alive? And you start to learn these things. So you go with less and less equipment, less and less weight. And I didn't even take a down jacket in 2003 to save the weight, 1.5 kilos of weight. I was competent enough to know I could survive even most situations just in the clothes I stood in. That's the sort of marginality of whether you're going to succeed or not.
Yeah. And the first expedition, obviously, there's a lot of personal failure wrapped up in that, but also the press were pretty unkind to you as well, weren't they?
Yeah, they were. Fair enough. There I was sort of obviously making out that I would, well, I don't know if I would get it, that I could get there. That's otherwise I wouldn't be doing it. And it was a pretty big slap in the face to me that I only did 35 miles out of 550 miles. And it was embarrassing. It was humiliating. And the press, that's the story.
But you had the courage of your convictions and obviously had a second attempt.
Yeah, that was so the first one was in 94.
Yeah.
Second one was in 98. It sort of takes that time just to raise the money and work out what needs to be done differently. 98 was not good. Well, it was much better. I made the mistake there of thinking, right, I can so do this. I'm not going to take a sledge. I'm going to put it all in a rucksack. It's the heavy sledge that makes it. If you take 60 days of supplies, surprise, surprise, it's going to take you about 60 days. So if you take 40 days of supplies, perhaps you can actually get it in 40 days. And the less time you're out on the ice, the less time you're exposed to risks, et cetera, et cetera. So I got to just beyond halfway. So was that 275 miles or something on the second expedition. I had a terrible problem with my knee. So I really couldn't walk without painkillers. I ran out of painkillers, and I remember just collapsing. My leg dropped through a crack about just wide enough to accept my ski, and often the cracks are very straight, and the ski just went straight down it up to my knee, and I just sort of fell in the snow, and I went to sleep. I was in great pain, but I actually fell asleep. I was just exhausted, and just thought, do you know what? This idea that I'm going to get to the North Pole, whatever it takes, it's a nonsense. I can't deliver on that whatever it takes mantra. I want to come back and be able to play football with my children, and I don't want to be with a walking stick for the rest of my life. It's just not that important to me to succeed at all costs. So I got I called for the plane to come and pick me up.
Let's talk about that, the third and final and the successful trip, which has not been repeated to this day. And
Yeah.
obviously because of what's happened with the ice floes, it's incredibly unlikely to ever be repeated.
Yeah, so I think I was the first person to set off and know that the distance was going to be, as I know, 416 nautical miles, which is, I think, 550 odd miles or 770 kilometres. I was going to go in a straight line. If there's open water, don't care. Put on the suit, swim it. Straight line. That was a massive psychological advantage as well as a sort of operational advantage. So that was key to recognise that actually there was now more and more water that was making this zigzag path ever longer with a fixed amount of, you could only pull so much food and fuel. We were all at the max for that. Yeah. So over the years, you were just becoming less and less likely to make it to the pole before your food ran out. So that was important. I believe that very few people really appreciate the challenge of the cold on brain function. Essentially, you are hypothermic. Like if you're meant to be 37, you're probably about 35.75, that sort of thing. So you behave as though you're drunk. It numbs you. It's so much easier just to keep doing whatever it is you're doing rather than to stop, think, get creative, come up with a solution. Right, got the solution, then act on that solution. It's a 3-step process, and it's really hard to do when you feel sort of drunk. It's easy just to keep going because probably that's just easier. So understanding and having the self-discipline to not make any mistakes. The cold is always there, especially in the earlier phase of the expedition, and it will punish you. There's no exceptions. It's not like a rogue wave if you're a solo sailor and you might get a bad wave because it's going to punish you straight away. There's no ifs or buts. So making no mistakes over 70 days is on your own is very hard. But the highest level challenge of all, which people don't go into at all in any of the books, is actually managing your emotional states. You feel you're on your own. How emotional can you be? Who else is winding you up? No one. But how you react to the situations and scenarios that you get into, you can go from extreme sort of joy and pleasure and excitement and happiness to complete depression. I can't do this anymore. I won't do this anymore. And angry and jealous that other people seem to have in their books had better conditions. And why am I being given such terrible conditions? Weather, sea ice at this point. It's being able to manage all of that and just keep an even keel. Yes, I'm feeling that, and understandably, not helpful though. Archive, get back on track. These are the emotions that I need to work with to get me going forward.
But also, it's the loneliness, isn't it? And when things are not going your way, being able to overcome that.
I mean, that's definitely true. That if you've got no one there to sort of, come on, mate, or have some of my chocolate, or let me sort of pull some of your weight in the sledge for a couple of days, to give you, you don't have that. But I think I can honestly say that I don't think I've ever felt lonely. I get energized by this. It's all down to me now. I have full responsibility for succeeding, big tick, or for failing. So let's not fail. I find it very energizing and empowering that it's all on you now, Penn. You've done the prep as much as you've done. Right, play your cards.
You talked about going in a straight line. And obviously you could do that with immersion suits. But actually, you can't necessarily just go in a straight line, can you? Because there's only a certain distance you could manage in that immersion suit.
Well, I was in the immersion suit for up to 3 3/4 hours was the longest that I was in swimming. Right. And sometimes you can't see the far side. You just have to know from experience there is going to be a far side and it's swimmable.
So you don't know whether you're going to be 2 hours or 5 hours or 6. Yeah.
It can look like a sea out in front of you.
Yeah.
But equally, from experience, you know that you could walk for days to the east or the west to try and get around it. It may take a few hours, but equally, from experience, it could take several days, or worse still, there may be no way around it because some of these open areas of water between the ice floes, they run for hundreds of kilometres. So let's just, on balance, take the odd hit on a longer thing, but actually you will get to the far side and that will be quicker on balance.
Yeah, but the other problem you've got is when you're in your immersion suit, you're not dissimilar to the movements of a seal, in effect. Yeah. And there's a few polar bears out there and, their dart is seals. That must be a worry.
It is a massive worry. It's like it's sort of chronic acute. Chronic in the sense that it's always there as a risk. It's a hard objective risk. It's not just perceived, it's quite real. When it happens, it really happens, and you have no way of knowing when it's going to happen. So I had, again, protocols and for how to try and make sure that I knew, that I could spot a bear approaching, but they're pretty limited. And then I had sort of procedures, right? If suddenly there's a bear is upon me, whether I'm in the tent or whether I'm out to the tent or whatever I'm doing, I kind of always knew where the bits of equipment were, what I would have to do as mentally, how many, would I have to take my mitts off? What would I have to take something off the end of the rifle before I fired it? Was it loaded? Where's the rest of the ammo? Is it on my hip or have I put it down somewhere? All this. So I'm constantly monitoring that, because when it happens, if you're not organised, you're probably going to die.
But I can understand that on the ice. Obviously, you can have your rifle or shotgun, but actually in your immersion suit, presumably the gun is inaccessible.
That is the most vulnerable that you are, and there's really nothing that you can do. If you're out, some meters away or even hundreds of meters from firm ice, you are behaving like a seal. You can't use your firearm. You're just going to have to do what you can do. And it's very little. And the bear, they're happy swimming in the water. They can very happy in the water. They're not called a sea bear, Ursus maritimus, for nothing. So you do have to take your chance. But then you just scan the horizon as best as you can with a little bit more extra. Hang on, are you sure that wasn't a bear? Because once you go in, it's kind of, you just got to get to the far side.
So, Penny, we talked about the immersion suits and obviously you going in a straight line, but actually there was one sort of encounter with water you had on the way where you didn't have your immersion suit on and it went a bit wrong. Perhaps you could tell us about that.
So I'd actually written in my diary that previous evening, you could probably do this in fractionally under 50 days. That would be the fastest expedition of all time. However many resupplies people had, or how many number of people were involved, and that was massively exciting and tempting. But I also wrote about it: don't be tempted. Remember the lessons of the past. What is the mission? It was to get to the pole. It wasn't to break a record or do it by a certain date. Just ruddy well get there. That is all anyone is interested in, including you, Mr. Hadow. So, giving myself that was a bit of a pep talk, and I crossed 4 different. They look like canals of where huge areas of ice floes have pulled apart. So it's open water, and then it's free frozen a few centimeters. I crossed the first one, and the second one, and the third one, and I think the fourth one. The fifth one looked exactly the same, but it did have a crack. So it obviously started to open up again, even more. And I was very tired, very drained. I was exhausted, basically, and wasn't making the best decision. I thought I could cross this difficult bit of very thin ice with my skis and get beyond firm ice there, and that would support my weight across the difficult bit. But the skis slipped as I loaded my weight onto the ski. It curved. It got the ends came in shorter, and down we went. And that was quite shocking. Exactly as I said earlier, it is a shock, and it's like a sudden realization. This could be it. And you say, I'm so close to the pole now. So I was sort of horrified that I'd made this quite basic mistake.
So close to the end, as you
say.
So
close to the end, and of course that's the temptation. You're getting closer and closer, so you mustn't let your guard come down. But I was very, very tired by the effort, basically, mental, psychological procedures and protocols all the time. It's exhausting. So I went in, and one of those basic trainings did kick in, which was relax into the water. You're wet now.
Yeah.
So I was sitting quite high in the water. I said, just stop and look around. And I saw this piece of ice, and I knew if I could get to that, I could get onto that, and then I could walk off the back of it. As you were saying earlier, you're breaking ice. And once you've broken the surface tension, everything's a thin edge. So you're just breaking. You were walking on it a moment ago, but now you're having to break it. It won't take your weight because you can't get up onto it. And that was what got me out of that particular spot.
obviously you continued without because you lost a ski in that process, so you had to do it without ski.
Yeah.
And you got there in a day early, I think, from what you projected.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think I know it's terrible, isn't it? But I think I got there in 64 days, and I think I said in my mind's eye 65 days, something like that.
Yeah. And what did you feel? Because that is, no one has done that before. No one has done it since. And it's almost like your whole life was destined to do this.
Yeah.
Incredible achievement. What does it feel like?
Yeah. Utter relief. I have been to the pole in my head, done this expedition so many times. I knew I could do it, but I hadn't done it. And an increasing amount of my headspace at home, day in, day out, week in, week out, month in, month out, was trying to, finesse equipment, procedures, trying to in little efficiencies and so on. And to have actually done it, it was this sense of relief. Right, I had now done it. It's over. I said I could do it, and now I have done it. So there are no flies on me. And for my family's reputation, if you like, and my father in particular, this was like mission accomplished.
At still quite a relatively young age. I mean, you've done your life's work.
Well, that's right. Well, up to a point. Yeah, I had no vision of the future. I had no plans. Those close to me would say, you must have a plan B. If this doesn't work, if you come on stack again, we know how difficult you find it. You must have a plan B. What work are you going to do? How are you going to support us? And And I felt I had to burn all the bridges. If I had an escape route, I needed to be, lashed to that mast. I was doing this. I probably wasn't going to succeed unless I had absolutely everything aligned north. So I remember thinking after that relief, literally within minutes, I thought, I am going to have so much headspace that's been occupied for this for now up to 15 years. This is going to be like a completely new experience. I had no plan. I had no idea what I was going to do next in terms of polar projects or non-polar projects. So, but then I had one bar on my satellite phone. I had to make 2 calls of about 15 seconds each, twice a day, reporting on the weather. I did have a 1-minute call with my base manager. I'm here now. Please send the plane up that I've paid for, and as planned, come and pick me up from the pole. I have 1 call with the Times for 1 minute, saying with a journalist who was following my story, and I have 1 minute with my wife. And after that, 9 days of living in limbo in my tent, thinking I've done this thing that I've put so much, and I can't share it with anybody. That was weird.
Yes, I can imagine that was frustrating. But when you did get back, certainly to the UK, I think you were whisked to Downing Street, weren't you? And you were fated quite rightly by for an incredible achievement.
Well, we got there in the end.
Yeah. Well, and that's
the thing.
It's a great story, and obviously, what you did afterwards in terms of your polar scientific work, and also in perhaps making us all aware of what is happening from a climate perspective, not just to the world, but particularly the ice caps.
Yeah, it's big stuff that's happening at speed. Certainly the loss of sea ice, which has slowed up for the last 10 years for 2 very specific reasons, is now going to start, its loss is going to start picking up speed again in the summers. It's quite possible that or quite likely, I should say, that by 2050, well, between 2030 and 2050, we won't have any sea ice around the North Pole. None, all gone in the summer times. And that period will extend of no sea ice at the top of the planet up to about 9 months in about 75 years' time. That's the sort of the general thing. But I do get opportunities. So I speak around, I'm invited around the world to corporate events, conferences, UN assemblies. People want to hear the story of what's going on, unseen by nearly everybody at the top of our planet. This loss of sea ice, this white protective heat shield that we've had for millennia, is going, and it's already starting to have, but those effects haven't even, have only barely begun in terms of the unpredictability of our weather systems that we have here in the UK and around the Northern Hemisphere. There can be major changes which will drive huge movements of people that are affected slightly further to the south, to where there's water, basically, is one way of looking at it. So, yeah, I share the urgency of the situation and the need for mitigations and adaptations, along with, based on the story. And really, that solo, what made all my future work happen is the swimming. Even I had not realised how essential it was but now you had to be able to swim sections if you wanted to reach the North Pole. That was my wake-up call, and I just thought, with a sense of social responsibility, well, I know what's happening up here, the speed and scale of it. I need to share it with as many people as possible. So that's what I do now. Much of my work is about that.
Pen, it's interesting. Sort of half your life was dedicated to adventure and to this ultimate pursuit, and the other half is, in a funny sort of way, coming to terms with it and working out what you could do next. What do you reflect on what your sort of pursuit of adventure has given you in life, and how it has, I don't know, perhaps given you some inner satisfaction that you wouldn't have derived if you'd stayed at IMG or got into the army?
Massive question. Two sort of answers. One is that the moment I stood at the pole, having reached it in the way that I had, for me, I had this vision of like a fist-sized gold nugget that I have in my back pocket. No one can ever take that away from me. I did that thing, and I know what it took to do it. It didn't just happen. I worked for it, and I was fortunate because it wasn't guaranteed that I got it. So up to a point, I always feel, if I ever sort of feel wobbly about something, I think, well, you did do that, and so you can do some of these things that not necessarily are straightforward. And the other thing I learned, I think, is that it is ultimately all about mindset. It's not about how big you are, how small you are, how strong you are, how fit you are. Everything comes down to what goes on in your mind. And there are about 8 different attributes within mindset. And once you start to understand those and where you are in relation to those 8 attributes, and that you can change it, I suppose the biggest thing I've learned, or I feel I've learned, is that it's all about process. The wonderful thing about the human mind and humans is that you can essentially train yourself within your mind to do whatever it is you want to do. And for some, it may take not very much time at all. And for others, it may take a lifetime. But, I'm often being asked about leadership. And, well, are you born leader or not? I would come back to the same thing. No, it's a nurture thing. It's not in your DNA whether you're going to be a great leader or not. It's about how you're nurtured. And the nurturing can start at any time in your life. It may be harder later on, but there are processes, very specific and deliberate processes, that if you don't know them, experts will. And if you follow that process, you will become a better and better, more and more effective leader, for example. So start with what you've got, because that's all you've got right now. Don't wait for something to happen until you'll be in a better situation. Get yourself to a better situation with what you've got right now. Just start.
Pen, it's been fantastic. We've probably taken up more of your time than you anticipated. I know you've got a birthday lunch to go to, but it's such a great story. And actually, I could have stayed here all afternoon talking to you. So thank you for coming in.
Thanks for having me and for asking such incredibly well-informed questions. I will be talking to my psychiatrist just to see if notes have been shared.
Thank you.